Good afternoon, good evening to wherever you may be. And welcome to today's webinar. What's next? That's the title of today's webinar. So I'll do a quick introduction of myself and also just to let you know that this is the final webinar for our GRADS webinar series. So my name is Kofi Boateng. I'm from Ghana, and I am a former Cliff grad myself. My role today is to ensure the session runs smoothly and make this last webinar a success. Okay, so opportunities such as this one that we are, having today is a very vital, opportunity for early career researchers to learn, apply, and position themselves to be the best that they can. And just to introduce myself a bit, I like to describe myself as a classic case of how networks can shape one's career path. I started off my PhD in 2015 after I identified a need, to bridge the gap in low emissions development in Ghana and maybe to Africa to a large extent. Shortly after, it became very real to me that there's a huge technical and research infrastructure gap, in Ghana and the sub-region for emissions research. So it was at this point that I started looking for opportunities that could help me in one, shaping my work on emissions quantification in rice production, and also getting access to technical infrastructure to help me analyze my data, my samples. It was at this point that I came across the GRADS program. And upon a second attempt, I got selected where I had my fellowship in the US with the USDA in Oregon. The technical assistance I required was taken care of through this fellowship. And I deliberately ensured that I made the most of the broader GRA network. I participated in almost all the GRA organized events online as much as I could. And I would say that this without a shadow of doubt that my association with the GRA network offered me the opportunity to be where I am today at the Global Meeting Hub, where I'm working with Hayden as the program associate for agriculture. So that's just a bit about myself. And I'll quickly run us through a few technical housekeeping notes to ensure that our session becomes very effective. So we're asking our presenters to keep their cameras on, and I also ask all our speakers to stay muted until they are called for their presentation. And can I also ask that you please keep your microphone muted unless there's a question? And I would always like also to note that the session will be recorded. If you have any questions, please feel free to type it into the chat and our moderators will read it out. If you feel comfortable to do so, you can raise your hand and any questions will be answered during the allotted Q&A sessions. So we want this to be a very interactive session. So during our Q&A, please do not hesitate to put your questions and or just raise your hands and you'll be noted and asked to ask your question. So move quickly to our first speaker. And our first speaker today is Dr. Mariana Garcia Scolani. Mariana is a GRADS alumni who were on the same cohort. And she's now an associate specialist in ruminant metabolism for Nestle Institute of Agricultural Sciences. So I'll just try to do a little introduction of Maria. And so Maria is from Paraguay. She's an agricultural engineer by training, holds both a master's and PhD degrees in animal sciences, both from the University of Florida. She's a Gator, right? Mariana focuses her research in assessing different strategies to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions of animal, beef, and dairy cattle origin. So with a special focus on mitigation of enteric methane emissions Currently, she's an associate specialist in the brand new National Institute of Agricultural Sciences based in Switzerland. So please help me welcome Dr. Mariana Garcia Ascolen. The floor is yours, Mariana.
Thank you, Kofi. And it's really nice to see you, see you. And then I also saw that Florencia joined and some other people that, yes, were part of the first. So you were the dinosaurs, we could say, of the Cliff GRADS. So yeah, I feel super happy to join you all. And yes, as I was telling Veronica, Lulani, and all the organizers, to me it's a very special occasion. Today, I just have a couple of slides, and I will share them shortly. But I would really like to talk to you about life after grad school, and in particular, an alternative or whatever we can consider alternative pathways to academia. As Kofi mentioned, I'm working for Nestle, so I'm working in industry. I know that some people might have some questions. So besides talking a little bit about my background and where I come from and what I was doing for Cliff GRADS and how it helped me, I would also like to just put it out there what it is to work in industry. I have some publications that I'm going to be sharing with you in the slides about what are some of the differences. I think nothing is better than there are not just only these two unique pathways. We know that in this world where we are living right now, there are a lot of startups, people who has imagination, creativity, can also make their own paths. So I would really like this opportunity for you to just interact with me, and hopefully you will have some questions and I will be able to answer and or ask my colleagues here to help me answer the questions you might have. So I'm gonna quickly share my screen. Yeah. Okay. I think you should be able to see it. Let me know, Kofi, if you can see it. I need to just change. Sorry about this technical issues.
Yeah, we can see it. I can see it. I think you can.
Can you see the presenter mode or the full thing?
Yes, in the presentation mode.
No, we don't see the presentation mode, Kofi. Sorry for interfering.
No, it's okay. So now you should be able to see it, right? I think that was Claudia. Claudia, are you?
Yeah, now it's okay. Sorry.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so these are the technical issues we still have after 2 years of working virtually. So anyways, as I was telling you before, I would like to talk a little bit about the Cliff GRADS experience. Just this very beautiful network of people working for Global Research Alliance. And then in particular, just very briefly talking about different career paths. Okay. So a little bit about me, and Kofi introduced me briefly just a couple of minutes ago, but yes, I'm from Paraguay, that it's in the middle of South America, as you can see in the map. And then Paraguay, you might or might not know, it's very big in agriculture and livestock production. Most of our internal revenue actually comes from agriculture and livestock. In terms of livestock, we are really important beef producers. Globally, we export most of our beef. In particular, well, we used to export it to Russia. That was a very important market for us. Now, as you can imagine, with all the different sanctions, the scenario has changed. We always need to adapt to these situations. We always need to be mindful of how the political conflicts, different as the pandemic that we experienced 2 years ago, all of these things, of course, are going to have a direct impact on our field of study, which we are all in agriculture, right? So as you can imagine, that was a huge hit for Paraguay. Regardless of that, and I don't know, this might not be super well known, but Paraguay also houses 2 of the largest hydroelectrical power plants in the world. So actually we export most of our electricity to Brazil, and I think some also to Uruguay. We also share one hydroelectric power plant with Argentina. The one that you see in the picture is actually shared with Brazil. And actually I come from Asunción, which is the city that you see on top. So I'm not a country girl, I'm a city girl that decided to start working in the country. So just to start putting this in context, we do not need to come from a country background, or we do not need to come from families who have farms or own cattle to be really engaged and love this field of agricultural sciences where we are all currently working. I did my BS in agricultural engineering in the National University of Asunción. And in 2012, I was able to do a training at the Egeru University of Agriculture and Veterinary Medicine. That was amazing. Was the first contact that I had with sustainable agriculture. So this program was sponsored by JICA, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency. So I would like you to start seeing all the different places where I've been and where I am today, just for you to be mindful on how important it is to take advantage of different opportunities and really to get out of your comfort zone. So as you can imagine, Paraguay was super far away from Japan, completely different cultures, completely different ways of producing. This was an amazing opportunity for me. So I spent 3 months in Egeru learning about sustainable animal agriculture. And then this experience was the one that made me say, okay, I really want to keep on studying. I really want to keep on to dig deep on agricultural sciences. So I got a Fulbright fellowship in 2013. So I did my master's in animal science at University of Florida, working with Dr. Nicolas Di Lorenzo. And then I stayed in his lab for my PhD. I graduated in 2020. And during my master's, I was working in increasing the efficiency of nitrogen metabolism in beef cattle. So again, I was working with beef cattle for both my master's and my PhD. I was working in a cow-calf operation at the University of Florida. And for my PhD, I decided to start working on strategies to mitigate enteric methane emissions. So that's where I decided, okay, I really want to work in methane. It's the hot topic. We really need to find a solution. This is what I want to do. So as part of my PhD, I also had the opportunity to do part of my research experiments at Cargill. So that was the first experience that I had working in industry. That was an amazing experience. Was a 3-month internship program where I could just run part of my trials. And then also in 2019, I applied to GRADS, and I was awarded a fellowship so I could be part of Dr. Sharon Hughes' lab in Northern Ireland in Queen's University of Belfast. So these were all amazing experiences. As we were saying before, I've met Kofi before, I've met Florencia who signed up in the chat. So this network of people keep on working with you throughout your whole career. And then finally, after completing my degree, I got a position here at Nestle. So right now we're really focusing on decreasing our carbon footprint in the dairy value chain. So for my PhD, I was working in beef, and now I'm working in dairy. So there are many things that in your career are going to change. You need to keep things flexible. And one thing for the PhD is that you always, of course, focus on something specific, but then you also need to keep that flexibility to just switch gears a little bit. So right now I'm still working on decreasing carbon footprint. I'm still working on mitigation of enteric methane emissions, but in this case, I'm working with dairy cows. A little bit of Cliff GRADS. So these are 2 pictures, and I'm not really good at keeping track with pictures. So I actually, this was by chance, I remember that I had posted some things in Instagram. So I was actually working with culturing anaerobic microbes, in particular ruminant methanogenic archaea. That was the main, or one of the main focus of my dissertation was actually to get to culture these very very difficult microbes to culture. As you can see there, you need a very highly reduced environment, completely free of oxygen, some not the most comfortable conditions to work with. But anyways, this was a really nice experience. During my Cliff Grads, I was able to start working a little bit on molecular biology. I'm a ruminant nutritionist by training, and that was what I was doing during my PhD, not too much in molecular biology, but this was a really nice first experience with molecular biology. So during my Cliff Grads, I was able to really learn about PCR, qPCR, different culturing techniques, and of course, get to know people from a different background, from a different academic background. I was coming from the US. This was my first experience in Europe again. So I really want you to see how we can connect the dots of our experience and how this experience really lead us to where we might go. This is a really nice picture. This is actually in Bali. This is the first cohort of Cliff Grads. This is Florencia here, so that's why I'm really happy that she's here. Kofi, I was trying to, because I knew you were going to be here, so I was trying to look for you. I didn't have the time. I just know that Florencia was right next to me. But anyways, it was a really, really nice experience. I think we got to discuss very important topics. I know that Hazel really put us to work. It was not just a passive congress where we will just go and hear speakers talk, but it was actually a very hands-on training. And again, it was a really nice experience working with people who are really, really engaged and are coming from so many different backgrounds and actually are working on things that you're not working. So you can definitely benefit from being in touch with people who are doing something different. We're all aiming towards the same goal of decreasing carbon emissions or nitrous oxide emissions or enteric methane emissions, but at the end of the day, we're all aiming at the same goal. And then just finally, I have two last slides. Just a little bit about career paths. So I really like this because, we're about to finish maybe 1 or even 2 years before finishing the PhD. We start thinking, okay, where are we going? What do we want to do? Hopefully your PhD experience was nice enough that you want to remain doing research and science. I hope that's the experience you're having. That's the experience I had. But again, I mean, we can always come back. We can always choose different paths. Nothing is completely fixed in our life. And whenever we see an opportunity, we need to be able to just grab it and take that chance, not to be afraid to do it. So just to finalize, there are here two papers that I was browsing yesterday. So actually, to me, it was super funny because actually we see here that this is in Science and this is in Nature. Nature. I don't know if you guys should open a Twitter account if you don't already have one. There is a lot, and I don't know, there are some hashtags that are super fun, like academia Twitter or things like that. There is a lot of talks going on really differences in how happy the people feel in academia versus industry, or monetary compensations, or what are the different aspects of working in academia or working in industry. At least in my case, when I graduated and I started a job in academia and then I moved to industry. So at the beginning, my former advisor was like, oh, it's always a little bit tricky because they really want you to stay in academia, and most of the time, because it's also important for them to have this network of other professors. But I think now, and at least in the position where I'm located now, right now, we're also doing research, and research is becoming more challenging, and we also have the same expectations to publish in peer review journals. So what I want to say is that do not worry. Paths are different. I think there is not one that is better than the other. I think this paper in Science actually summarized some points. This is not black and white, so don't take this as set in stone. I would say this is a a rainbow of colors in between black and white. But I think in general, this pretty much summarized the differences between working in academia or in research. So something that, yes, I feel that working here, we really work as a team. So you really need to learn to communicate effectively with other people. You need to work with people that are working on contracts, on legal teams, on patent teams. So you really, you cannot work by yourself. You cannot be an isolated person. So I think this is really key. Again, in research and academia, my projects would require a lot of people, and in my lab, we really supported each other. But yes, in academia, things might be a little bit, depending on what's your area of study, might be a little bit more individual. Here, and to me, this is something super important. It's something that I'm still learning here at Nestle. So we really need to, or at the industry, you have a goal and you need to satisfy the demand of a client or the market. So for us, it's not just that we need to decrease enteric methane emissions, but our milk still needs to be of very high quality. We cannot alter organoleptic qualities of the milk, for instance. So we need to increase the nutritional quality. So when I was doing my PhD, I was really focused on decreasing enteric methane emissions and performance of the animal. But in this case, because you know that your product reaches a specific end, so you also need to always have that in mind. We work really fast. So you can imagine there is a lot of other companies doing the same. So you need to really work efficiently and really fast. I think that sometimes, and while I was doing my internship at Cargill, I also felt that decisions, you need to be super sure, and you need to be super assertive on how to make, or at the moment of making a decision. This is relative, but yes, I think at the industry level, patents are super important, but of course, we also need to do research in order to publish patents, and then of course, we would also like to publish our results in a well-renowned publication, in a well-renowned journal. And then again, there is no good or bad or better or worse, it's just different things. And again, as long as you keep doors open and as long as you keep things flexible, I think you can always try to go back and forth. If you don't like it, you can always go back. Maybe if you want to go back to academia after industry, you might need to do a postdoc, but it's not impossible. So again, don't think that everything is set on stone. And then finally, whenever you're reaching this time to make a decision, just think, what do you want to do? What are your work habits? What are you expecting in terms of compensation? Are you really interested in having the title of full professor at some day, or you see yourself more leaning towards being the director of research and development of a company? So you really need to think, where do you see yourself in 1 to 10 years or even farther along? And then what kind of questions you want to answer? So nature-based, if they are more practical. Then what are your research skills and what is something that you really enjoy to do? Because that's something super important. So I don't want to say that as in any job, there are better and worse days, but you cannot be doing something that you don't like to do for the rest of your life. So you really need to think on what things you like to do. And then assessing what are your people skills. Do you really like to work on a team, or you are a person that really, really likes to work by yourself? How are you going to connect with other people? There are people who are really introvert, other people are really extrovert. So you really need to assess yourself and understand that there is, again, no bad or good, and there are just different paths. And besides, as I was saying at the beginning, besides academia and industry, right now there are a lot of different things that can be done. You can even have a YouTube channel where you talk about, there's a really nice person in Instagram, she's called the Food Science Babe. She's amazing because I think she has a degree in food safety. and she dedicates herself to explain literature, scientific literature to people just in very short reels. And she fights fear mongering about food. So it's amazing. So, I mean, and that's a career at this time, at this moment when we're living. So just think about what you want to do and try to go for that. And if at some point you say, okay, this is not for me, it's okay. You can always go back. Now, nothing is set in stone. So with that, I don't know if I'm on time. I hope I am. And I'm ready to answer any particular question that you have. This is my email address here at Nestle. And I'm also on Twitter, but I didn't put my Twitter handle. But you can always find me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you very much for this presentation and for sharing with us your experience working in the private sector. We will take some questions from the audience, but it was really, good to hear you say. I mean, I put down three key things. One, leaving your comfort zone was a key thing, being flexible, and looking out for opportunities wherever they may be, and then taking advantage of those opportunities. I have a few questions, Mariana. The first one was like, when should you start considering, which career path would you take upon completion of your PhD? When do you start, considering that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least in the US, where I was doing my PhD, it is a question that you start asking yourself, depending on when you take your qualifying exams. I took mine kind of very early in the process. So I would say by your mid-PhD, you should at least know where you want to go and try to look for opportunities. So and again, if you don't know where you want to go, for instance, if your professor works with a company, let's say, or if the professor has collaborations with industry or with other organizations, just ask for an internship. Just ask if it's possible to run part of the trial, because at some point, if you do it, you will have to have an interaction, for instance, with a company that is working with your professor, and then you get to experience, okay, how the decisions are made and what is more important. So I think you know what academia is, you know how it works, you have the experience with your professor. We know that we need to publish, you know what are the expectations. Many of you probably had to write a grant. To apply for a Cliff grad, you actually need to sell yourself, and you need to say why you think you're going to be good for a particular research program in academia. But we're not really exposed so many times to industry. So at least try to see if there are opportunities for little projects or grants or funding from companies, and try to taste if you like them. And then there are NGOs, there are governmental organizations, there are so many different places where we could work. There is policy. I mean, just if we think about ourselves, we work on mitigation or adaptation to climate change, but then all this knowledge can also be put to work in terms of policy and governance. So there are really a whole array of different career paths that we can follow. But just, I would say by your mid-PhD, just start thinking, because if you want to stay in academia, then of course you need to really publish, and you really need to start looking, okay, do you want to go for a postdoc? I know that in Europe, it's really important to have a postdoc before really applying for a professorship position, not so much maybe in the US or for some universities. So there's a whole array of options. So the sooner, I would say, the better, but not to lose sleep about that.
Thank you, Mariana. Another question from our guest. No, you speak highly of networking, which was very crucial in setting your career path. How central was that, your networks, in deciding finally to go to industry? How central was your networks to that decision? Did you get advice from them? Did you get insights before you finally made a decision?
Yes, I think it's super important. And just from a very basic point of view, whenever you submit your CV, you're going to submit your references. And that's a very basic point, but you need to put really key people, you know, they're going to call them, they're going to talk to these people. So at least for my position in Nestle, it was my former advisor. I think he's the base of my network. And my colleagues in my lab. We really had a very close, tight collaboration with my other colleagues in the lab. So that's my first ring of people. Whenever I need something, I know I can call my former lab mates from University of Florida, and they are going to answer to me, because that's my first ring. So my former advisor, my lab mates. Then another one of my referees for my application was a person from Cargill, for instance. And then another one of my referees was also from Queen's University in Belfast. And because they know you, and because you keep communicating with these people, and they were also involved, for instance, in a project, the dissertation project or the master's degree thesis is super important to build those connections, because people get to know you. I mean, if you are a good researcher, they will likely speak highly about you, and that's what you need when you need to apply to a position. And then for some things, I mean, because we cannot know everything, that's when you need to rely on this network of people. But I would say the advisor, the committee, the PhD committee, and the lab mates are the first ring of people that you should be, you should always try to keep track with. Yes. Super important. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mariana. A couple of questions, maybe one or two, and then we'll be done. So, how did you find the process of, you know, settling into your new career after completing your PhD? Was it smooth? Was it rough? Was it how did you do that?
It was kind of weird, because we were in the middle of the pandemic. So yeah, there was a lot of uncertainty, but anyways, I went back to Paraguay. I got a position back in the university, the National University of Asunción, where I did my bachelor's degree. And then I felt that was not really fulfilling me. I don't know. And then a friend of mine, actually one lab mate, again, going back to network, a lab mate actually sent me a position, and he said, this is you. This is you. I read this, and Mariana, it has your name. It was the position that I have right now. And I said, why not? If I'm not feeling happy, again, it's as you said, it's getting out of your comfort zone. I was back in my country. I'm Paraguayan, so I was back in my country. I was speaking my own language. I was speaking Spanish after 6 years of speaking English with a very thick Hispanic accent, even though I was in Florida. And then it was working with dairy. It was not working with beef. So there were some things that I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be such a good ruminant nutritionist for dairy as I was for beef, because most of I mean, if you start putting excuses, you're never going to do it. So that's why you need to, and then you need to learn to be flexible, and you need to put your good qualities out and say, okay, I think I'm going to be good for this position because of this and this and this. And then of course, I had to move to Switzerland. So again, I'm a foreigner. I don't speak French. I'm in a French-speaking canton. Thank God in Nestle we speak in English, so I can communicate with people. But then really, this is a very scientific, science-oriented position. So you keep on learning, and then you know that, okay, you don't need to know everything. Of course, you are giving your expertise for some things, but no one really expects you to know everything about everything. That's why you need also to rely on your team. So for instance, we have a statistician. So yes, for my PhD, I had to run my own analysis. I know how to set a trial, but of course I go and I talk to a statistician. When I need something in particular with ruminant microbiology, I have my colleague and I ask her, and we benefit from this interaction. So never to be afraid that, no, I'm not good enough. No one is good enough. No one is perfect. But you keep you can keep on building. And then, sorry, Kofi, one last thing is one thing important in industry is that you can change gears. So if I don't want to stay working on methane and for the rest of my life, and I want to move to a more broader subject as sustainability, for instance, well, I can do it. I can change a little bit. So it takes some time. It's not easy peasy, but it's not the end of the world. It's just the first movement to break inertia.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Mariana. I think it was great hearing from you and sharing your story. I appreciate your time and thank you. It was very good seeing you once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kofi, and thank you, everyone. I will try to answer some questions in the chat if I see that something remain unanswered.
Yeah. Thank you, Mariana.
Awesome.
Now I would move on to our second speaker, Dr. Anthony Egeru. Dr. Anthony Egeru is an associate professor at Makerere University and the Training and Community Development Manager at Roof Forum Secretariat. His primary focus has been on climate change adaptation and indigenous systems, climate smart agriculture, rangeland health, and landscape heterogeneity as part of carbon sink pools for mitigation action, resilience of community level social ecological systems to climate change, and cultural epidemiology of infectious diseases, especially malaria. Malaria is a big deal here in our region. Dr. Egeru, the floor is yours now.
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning from Mexico, where I am. I came here for a conference on transforming higher education. That's where I'm based right now until I leave here on Saturday. I titled my conversation with the Cliff GRADS fellows as Getting Your Way to the Top. I only have one slide and I shall talk around that. So Dr. Garcia has helped me to sort out a lot of things that I wanted to say. So pretty much things are really aligning. And so when she talked about patterns, Mariana, this is I can probably patent my drawing. So I decided to do this talk based on this cartoon that I drew yesterday when I was in a meeting. So I was thinking, how am I going to make a simple presentation to the fellows? And so I decided to draw this cartoon in order to there are several stages in it. So there's a more complex one, which has a lot of detail in it. And that probably wouldn't make a lot of sense for sharing on screen because it would be too congested. Well, I did some fine art in secondary school. This is now after maybe 20 years that I have tried to sketch again. But anyway. All right, so thank you very much. I'm just going to share with you some of the things that I've tried to do that have tried to shape me. Kofi has made quite an introduction of myself. And I think if I can start is that on the left-hand side, running both on the left-hand side, if you draw a line, both on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side at the bottom, you can put something there that happiness. For me, the underlying principle of everything that we do and everything that we are working for is happiness. It's the greatest thing that you can ever have. It's useless even if you get a $200,000 salary, annual salary, or even if you call it $500,000 a year, and you are not happy, it's useless. That's why people commit suicide, because they are not finding the meaning for what they are doing and why they are doing what they are doing. So at the bottom of everything that I do, for me is happiness. Am I happy? Am I happy waking up every morning? Am I happy wherever I am? I took 50 hours of flight from Uganda to Mexico, 50 hours. That is hilarious on the body. So let me start. Getting your way to the top for me has been, do I know me? Do you know yourself? As a grad fellow, do you know yourself? Do I know me? In other words, even the conversation, why, for example, did I take a PhD? For most of the people generally, relatively in Africa, is that you go to PhD when you're already working, you're already placed. In the Western world, it's relatively different. People get to PhD when they are still very young, 25, 26 years. You are enrolled into their PhD. That is the relative average age of an undergraduate fellow in many other countries, or master's fellows in most of the African countries. So the conversation is, why am I going for PhD is relatively different from many fellows from the African continent. But the question rather is, why am I doing, and what strategic PhD am I doing? And why am I doing the PhD that I'm doing? So knowing yourself becomes very important, and knowing yourself comes with, what is my mission? What is right? Do I have a mission? Am I into leadership? What is my energy? Where does my energy come from? What is my attitude? Remember, your attitude expands your horizons, and it drives everything. At the bottom of everything, if you're a pessimist, then you look at everything as a hammer and a nail that needs to be solved with, it's always a problem. You begin to look at everybody around you as a problem. You don't look at a challenge as an opportunity for you to learn, but you're looking at it as a problem to pull you down. So knowing yourself becomes so central that even before, they always say, when you're pointing somebody like this as a problem, know that 3 fingers more are pointing at you. So you need to look at yourself. So for me, trying to reflect and even ask my own colleagues, who am I? What are my own weaknesses? What are my individual strengths? Reflecting on that has been very critical, because with that, it has been able to help me to chart where to position myself. Life is a strategy. So if you don't have a strategy for your life, I'm sorry, getting your way to the top will be a nightmare. So you need to define yourself. Who am I? What is my mission? What is my strategic fit? What is my attitude? Sometimes people tell, yeah, but why are you so happy? Even when things are hard, I always say, let the river flow. Because the river has 3 stages, from the youthful state to the mature state to the old stage. Somehow, if the river is violent in the initial stages, it will come down by the time it is at the old stage. So knowing yourself, life for me is a strategy. You need to define yourself. So the second thing, because you are a PhD grad fellow, and for me also, when I went through this process was, okay, so what is my purpose? Is it holistic? You need to have some bit of that to enjoy yourself. Do you have a holistic life? Sometimes we get so taken up by publishing, you even forget that you have a girlfriend, you have a wife, you have a husband, you have children. Sometimes people tell me, but my students, I tell them, I go to dance, I go to club. And they ask, but Prof, honestly speaking, when do you get time? And I tell them, yeah, I go to club, I go, I dance, I have a life to live. Not everything is about manuscripts. Not everything is about writing proposals for money. I have a life. After I've written a proposal and I've been paid my salary, we have a saying in Uganda, eat that kamane. If it is not going to solve your problems of cement, eat that kamane. So don't look at everything in terms of cement, bags of cement for building your house, or for building a house for your mother, your grandmother, your parents. You're not going to solve problems of the whole world. Have a holistic life. Know that life is a balance. You overdo too much things, you think everything, my friend, you are not the first to publish papers. There are people who have published 1,000 papers. Take it step by step by knowing your purpose, work systematically, and have a purpose beyond yourself. Everything is not about yourself. Helping others for me is a lot more things that I have been doing. And because of that, I begin to define things. So even when I was in for my PhD, before even I went for my PhD, I had this idea of establishing a community-based organization. So I started writing that right away from the time I was in for my master's. And I have been building this and building this and building this slowly. When I went in for my postdoc, I kept reflecting and reflecting. And I've been building it. Now I am in the process of registration. I have built a website. There are some activities that are happening around it because I am passionate about giving back to the community. I've been doing it through my small salary things I put up. I go to the community. I have communities which have helped to deliver clean planting materials for cassava planting materials, and they call it Itoni variety. Now, I don't need to talk. The people have nicknamed the variety Itoni variety because that is where I come from. We use a lot of Itoni, Kofi. You would now be, they wouldn't call you Kofi, they would be calling you Kofi. So what is helping others? Those things begin to help and push and propel you. Now, what is my purpose? You also need to understand that as a PhD grad fellow, you have been reading a lot of technical books, measuring methane. You've been talking about IPCC, RRCPs, and all the codes and so forth. What books are you reading outside your technical stuff? If you have not bought any book outside your technical knowledge, please, after today, go spend some money and buy a book, which is nothing to deal with theories about physics, theories about climate change, theories about ecology, nothing about that. Try to get a non-technical book that can help you begin to say, yeah, I never thought about this actually. It's actually nice. So try to read something different. All right, so that second diagram, I was trying to put a pistol. All right, so that is my illustration of a pistol. I don't know whether you are looking, what it meant to you in the way you are seeing it, but that was for me an illustration of a small gun, a handheld gun. For those who are Americans, you love guns a lot, but the Africans, we don't like guns because they smell trouble. So so with that pistol, it sends you are shooting a bullet. Those bullets take you to who do I need? What am I up to against? Because you're fighting, you are trying to move yourself to the top. What are you against? What are you up to? And what do you need in order to recharge your gun, in order to be able to navigate the processes? Yeah, so you need to be able to look at those things and begin to check, do you need the technical skills, the social skills, the economic skills, and then under the new skills.
Hello, Dr. Egeru. Hello. I think Dr. Egeru is having some technical difficulties. Hello, Doc, can you hear me? Hello. Hello. Maybe if we could just take a break, maybe 5 to 10 minutes break, so that we could sort out Dr. Egeru's technical challenges. So please, we'll take a quick break and get back. Thank you. And please don't leave. I mean, the discussion is getting very interesting. So let's hold on till we get Dr. Egeru back. So take a break now. Thank you. Hello, we are back. Thank you very much for staying. We move on to our second part. Unfortunately, Dr. Egeru couldn't get back. I think we couldn't resolve the technical hitch. I think where he is has the network problem. So we will share his email, and if there are any questions that would want to ask him, hopefully maybe he joins us again before we end the second part. But from his presentation, it was clear that in whatever decision we make, one, happiness should be key. We should be doing what we are happy about. Our attitude is key, and we should enjoy life. You only live once, so enjoy life whilst you work hard is also key. And one critical thing he also said was about giving back, which I think is very good. Wherever you may find yourself, giving back is an essential part. Because our networks, our societies, our communities, they give us so much that we need to give back to make sure that they are also benefiting from whatever that was given us. We would quickly move on to our next speaker, Dr. Claudia Arndt. Claudia has been hosting GRADS students for several years. She's the team leader at the Mazingira Livestock Center. And she has worked as a scientist at numerous research institutions, including the University of La Molina in Peru, the Tropical Agricultural Research and Higher Education Center in Costa Rica, the Environmental Defense Fund, and has coordinated for an international project between Bangor University and Rotherham State Institute. Please, let's welcome Dr. Claudia Arndt. Doc, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kofi. Thank you for having me here. Even though not being a former GRADS student, I do support the program very much. I do think it's very important, and having benefited from the program, having students myself. I'm just going to share my screen. How is that? Good?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, perfect. So what is next? And I'm going to go more through what has happened throughout my career, which is to give you an overview of different things that you can do. I know I'm sort of the academic person here, but I don't think that I really have a very, like, my career path hasn't been that straightforward as of other colleagues who I have who went straight to be like a professor at the university. So as Kofi said, I've worked at various institutions. So basically in 2014, I got my PhD. And then for various reasons, I actually took a year off, and I will get into this a little bit more. And then I had more or less 2 years of postdocs at different institutions, 1 year in Peru, and then I ended up with the current position. So I'm going to talk about the different steps there in more detail, just to give you an overview about how diverse this experience has been to me, and how different decisions or things I did led actually to opportunities down the road. So I actually had, my PhD took longer than expected because I had to deal with data being falsified by a technician, which was recovery data for the chambers. So it actually took an extra year. We had to discard one of my studies. And basically, like, that can happen and will probably happen to everybody in their career. It just happened really early on in my career. And you're also not in a position of power there. So I also needed to, you basically need to stick up to yourself and be true to your ethics and what you think needs to be done throughout your career. And sometimes it's not hard, and you're not always having everybody on your side. But let's say everything turned out actually well, and there were miscommunications on different sides, and actually things got resolved well. Anyways, I wanted to take a year off afterwards, and I also wanted to learn Spanish. Latin America had always interested me. So I basically visited 4 countries, and I did learn Spanish while I was there, which is actually key to my positions afterwards, which I didn't know at the time. And I think a lot of times your advisor would never recommend you doing this. I think very few people would recommend a PhD student to do this, because then they may tell you it's very hard to get back in. Given the situation I was in, I wasn't really thinking much about it. I basically did what I felt was right for me at the moment. And then I did look for jobs, but I did look basically through websites at that point of my life. And actually, I guess maybe I was lucky to find a job, because I don't think that's the most common way of finding a job if you don't have network or connections yet. But during this whole thought process, I was also thinking about, do you want to do a postdoc, and why would you be doing a postdoc? That's why I threw in this random slide here, to make people think about an actual postdoc position. So what is a postdoc actually meant to be? Because sometimes I also feel like you're just cheap labor for some project, I'm sorry. And sometimes people will take advantage of you, and they will make you, that's why I put the time commitment for postdocs here. Do not do postdocs more than 5 years. I think it's also an international standard. I know agriculture, I don't think it's as bad, but in different disciplines, they try, and even like prestigious universities try to give people postdocs for more than 5 years, and that's really inadequate. So don't let people do that to you. If you've done your postdoc and you've gained your experience, go elsewhere. Don't continue doing postdocs, because at some point I said, I'm not going to do any more postdocs, and I had my cutoff, and it was fine. It worked out fine, but maybe you need to make a decision for yourself and also be aware of this. Now I should be doing something else. So what is a postdoc? A postdoc is when you Google it, is a short-term research position that provides further training in particular field, and for individual planning research careers in academia, government, or industry. And it can give you opportunity to develop independence and new technical skills and focus on research interests. Often people do it to get more publications that you will need to get an academic position. But it's also like to get new skills. One of my ex-advisors said to me, if you do a postdoc, don't do it in the same field as, like, don't do it with exactly the same thing you've been working in. And that for me personally was something, because I didn't want to do another nutrition trial similar to what I had been doing during my PhD. All my postdocs were actually different. And you can see that when you look at my publications, because my publications are, I feel like I'm a little bit all over the place, but that's also what I needed for actually being in the position I am right now. But also I do appreciate and realize there are some people who are very interested in really basic science, and they want to look maybe at a particularly at starch digestion, and they will look at enzymes and how they do that. So there, in these cases, if that's the way you want to go, you should get more skills in doing that basic science you're really interested in. So I got my postdoc with the Environmental Defense Fund. So this is unusual because it's a United-based nonprofit environmental advocacy group. And I don't think many people end up doing a postdoc with an NGO. I was located in San Francisco, and they do have an office of chief scientists. So actually, like, the science they were doing is solid. And our chief scientist was actually from Brown University before, which is also a very good university in the US. They had hired Alexander Ristov, which probably most of you know if they work in nutrition at least, as a consultant who basically was also involved in hiring me. I did interview with him as well. And they had gotten money from a funder to look at the livestock methane emissions because they are interested in methane as a short-lived climate pollutant, and they had been working in oil and gas. So for me, for the research I got to do now was actually looking at livestock methane. Again, I had looked at enteric emissions previously in my PhD, but now I actually was leading dairy facility measurements, and I had 3 different teams on the ground doing these measurements. So it's basically coordinating them while I was doing farm data collection to do the modeling of the emissions to see how well these would all line up. We also started a meta-analysis with the Feed and Nutrition Network, which now this year got published in the PNAS article that came out. So it took us quite a long time. A different story, but this was like, yeah, that was hard. You have to stick with it. And in the end, it paid off well, I think. And I do think we have quite a good study, but it was a long way forward. And during this, the good thing I had was a Feed and Nutrition Network through Alex and through the meta-analysis, which was through that. And that's also how I got connected to the GRA. And it was good because I got a network there, and also through the people on the paper. I have like over 20 co-authors, so they do know me, and if I can reach out to many of them, and many of them have been very supportive throughout the process. Besides that, I also learned other skills by working at an NGO, just how they function, what they're doing, what are their motivators, why they're doing what they're doing. Working with activists was also actually important because you do understand how the role of an activist is in research as well, and how it can drive funders' decisions on where to put money and so on as well. And in regards of supervision, I was working with a research assistant who I was supervising. I also had summer interns from Cornell, and we also have like publications together that came out through that work. This time when I looked, because it was a 2-year postdoc, I actually started looking for positions through my network. Through my professional network, and I did that through my advisor at UW, actually, who connected me to the person, because back then it was also driven by private decisions, or my private life, where to go and so on. So I knew certain locations I could go, and I actually got the contact. I knew where I wanted to go or could go. So Costa Rica, for example, was one part of it. So I knew my ex-advisor had connections to there, so he connected me with them. So I reached out to them. At that point, they didn't have a job, but then actually when it came to the end of my contract, they did have a project that had come through. And then that's how I got then the opportunity to work there as a postdoc, because it fell really well on my professional profile. So that postdoc then was at Cartier, which is a tropical agricultural research center and higher education center. And I couldn't have done that postdoc if I hadn't taken that year off, because I had to work in Spanish. My Spanish was still very poor, even though I was studying a lot. But if you start from zero with language, I think we all have learned a second language, and we know how much it takes. I somehow had forgotten how much it took for English. The Spanish made me aware how much it takes. It's still not perfect, but I think I have a good working knowledge of Spanish now. So I was there then with a project which was called Suscarida. That project was between Cartier, Bangor University, and Rothamsted. The project was focusing on sustainable futures for the Costa Rican dairy sector and optimizing environmental and economic outcomes. So the nice thing was I had also a very diverse team of a lot of scientists that I worked with and who I could learn from and just see what they're working on, from LCA to economic analysis. We did a MAC curve, which came out. We actually have a paper now accepted just also a while later about silvopastoral systems and carbon accounting for these. So the array of research that came out of the project was quite diverse, and I was actually involved in all these different parts, which is good because it gives you a better understanding of what your colleagues are doing, and it also helped me to step out of my comfort zone and look more in systems, because I think we do need to collaborate with everybody to actually make the right decisions, because if we're just working in our silos, we may miss negative impacts of our work, and maybe our work doesn't fit in what is needed actually. During this, I basically did ammonia measurements of pastures, which were quite intensive and took a long time. And I coordinated the LCA surveys. But altogether, because the rest of the team was really in the UK, I was an on-the-ground project coordinator for the project. So I did also, when you looked at other skills, I had to do the budgets. I did national stakeholder engagement and management. I did supervisor or technician, PhD master students. I had Cliff grads and also interns that were there for a long time, helping with the ammonia measurements, really, because it was such an intense measurement. And I did also organize international meeting there. So I did a lot of things, which I think other people wouldn't be happy to do during the postdoc. And I had a discussion with a colleague lately about it, because it's not creating papers, and sometimes people are only doing postdocs for papers, but I do think it actually gave me a lot of skills that I now also need in my position. Because being exposed to doing budgets and so on during a postdoc, when you still have a quiet, let's say you may think you're busy, but you're not really busy when you know how busy you get later on. You always think you're busy, but then somehow you can get more busy. So it was nice to be able to do this sort of in peace, I would say, and not on the run, because nowadays I have to do a lot of things on the run. This position also, again, gave me the networking possibilities. I was allowed to represent Kati at the livestock research group meetings, which also brought me into these meetings. And honestly, I was one of the youngest people who do attend these meetings. I know Florencia, that's how I know her, actually, through these type of meetings. But let's say as a woman, there are not many women and there are not many people my age usually during these meetings. Now I'm older, so now they're younger people more, but at that point there wasn't. So it was really good to actually get to know the international community as well. And of course, I continued working with the Feed and Nutrition Network. The next job, actually, I was contacted to be part of a proposal. So what happened there was I had contacted Carlos Gomez at the University de la Molina previously, actually, when I was looking for jobs. But he had included me in a proposal before, which didn't go through. And then he contacted me again because he knew I was at Kati, and was like, hey, Claudia, do you want to be part of this proposal? I was like, okay, let me think about it. And I thought about it and I was like, okay, yeah, sure. So that's like how I got to the next position after Kati. So it was basically my networking from previously that got me to the next step. And that was okay, not as expected, because I basically took the last commercial flight into Peru at that point because COVID had just started. I got my visa on Friday, on Saturday I flew. And that was really the last flights going out on that day to Peru. So the lockdown was a little bit longer than expected and everything. I honestly had never I was there for a year, and given Peru was so badly affected by the pandemic, I've never set foot at the university campus. We are all working remotely. But I have to say, Carlos he took very good care of me and made sure it was okay, because he knew I'd just come there and nobody could go anywhere. And from Kati, I also had friends in Lima who I actually ended up living with, so that was great and a good experience. But then it impacted the research as well, because we weren't really able to do research. So what I ended up doing was supervision of the student projects that were already ongoing, because the students couldn't go out, nobody could do measurements. We did plan some student projects, and we did a lot of proposal writing. That was the main activity. And it was good because everybody needs proposal writing and training in it. And at some point, Carlos came to me and he had this AMSAT call for networking. And he's like, why don't you write something here? And it included at that point, I think, Argentina and Colombia. So I reached out actually to Flora, I reached out to the people who I knew through JRA to write that proposal. And we got through, and we got another CTEC proposal for getting more people into the network. So we actually were able to build a low carbon livestock research network while I was there, and bring together more people working in Latin America, because the problem was that a lot of researchers didn't really feel part of the GRA, because the activities of the GRA are project funding driven, and Latin America was not included in the funds that are usually given out by EU or by the US. So they were often left behind. And during this process, actually, Hayden, when we set up the networks, was Montgomery is very involved in that and was also very supportive of us. So he did, which I'm still very glad of that this happened, because he did realize the need, and then GRA was able to put 100,000 for the ARANET calls for lower middle income countries to join these calls. And now they're actually from the network, they're projects with France and Spain, who we connected to through these proposals that got funded. And I think this actually was great. And maybe the network could be a little bit more active, but I think that what happened is that it's still active enough, and it made connections that are going to last and that are going to make a change in the collaboration between Latin America and Europe. And I'm actually very happy that we were able to do this. And Flora, actually, I don't know if she's still there, Florencia, she also played a big role in this, and she was always supporting and helping a lot. And yeah, we're all connecting through Zoom because we had nowhere to go there at this time. So I guess it was a good time to do this. And I continued networking by being representative of UNALM for everything around the GRA, actually. And the next position I had I wasn't looking. I had only been 1 year in Peru. I was happy with my position. I was happy with my boss. But then a colleague, similar to Mariana, just forwarded me, is like, hey, this position, this looks like something for you. So that's how I found my current position, honestly. So I applied for it. And now I'm actually senior scientist and team lead at the Mazanguera Center, which is a center that looks at environmental impact of livestock in Africa. And we're quite unique because we have a lot of expensive facilities to do all kinds of measurements. And we are part of the International Livestock Research Institute. I'm stationed now in Nairobi in Kenya. And I'm going to talk more about what we're doing, just so you see how my positions have changed and how this has changed. I have never been really deliberate in where I was going and how I was looking. I think I would say I do not really have a plan for future. I do know I'm doing what I think is good for me at the moment and what makes me happy. I take opportunities as they come. And I think having that possibility to be flexible and looking at, I wasn't planning to be in Africa at this point. It just happened. It was like, okay, this is a really nice opportunity to come work there. You can actually center, you can do so many things, and you can really make something that makes a change and has an impact. So I think if you have a plan, I think this is great. I do not have a strict plan of where I'm going and what I know certain things I'm not that interested in doing, but I know things that I'm interested in doing. But even if you have a plan, maybe sometimes just look around, maybe there's something coming across your way that works for you. So about our center, we are able to do direct, indirect measurements of the environmental impact from livestock. I'm going to show you what we all have, just to give an overview of what my responsibilities now are, but also I'm taking the opportunity to get you maybe involved in partnering with us, or also see possibilities for you working with us. I continue networking quite a bit, and I do think it's very important. I'm again the one who represents ILRI for all the GRA stuff, on also just livestock emissions, because that's what our center does within ILRI, and there's nobody else who does it within ILRI. Other skills, the position was quite, I think the position was quite, needed a steep learning curve for me in regards of leadership skills. I had taken courses during university as well, and project management, because maybe in Costa Rica I was managing one project. Now I'm the PI of probably 4 or 5 projects. I'm not even sure, because it's so many. And really important is in managing up and down. The up is actually sometimes more challenging than the down, I feel, because you need to make your bosses see what you're doing, and also to make sure they represent and they understand what you're doing, because what you're doing is not necessarily their field of expertise, so they can also understand your needs and represent you for funders, because Again, we're not a university, so our funds comes through international funders. So it's not academia per se, although we do the research. Anyways, so Mazingira Center, so our mandate is to provide the environmental baseline data intervention testing in livestock production systems. But we also serve as a center for capacity building and as hub for scientific exchange in Africa. So there's lots of capacity that we still need to build in Africa, and we're also always happy to host people for short-term stays if they want to learn certain things that we have in the lab and just to follow around maybe an experiment. I think for this round of Cliff Grads, we probably published like 5 projects, maybe even more. So we're going to have a bunch of Cliff Grads next year in the lab. Our vision is to test and develop management strategies that increase livestock production while decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, resource use, and environmental degradation. Here you just see some of the measurement equipment that we have. The team became, so that's how you see the change from my responsibilities from maybe supervising a few students. Now I have 4 scientists underneath me, 3 postdocs, and then a bunch of students as well. Thankfully, we have Daniel, our lab manager, who's overseeing most of the lab activities and making sure that all goes all right. And the scientists all have different fields of focus. So this is why my background in having all this diverse education was very important, to understand what they're doing and try to connect what everybody is doing with each other and make sure we're not working in silos. So anytime we do a nutrition trial, Cesar will get some manure and get it to Sonia. So she actually also looks at manure emissions, and often that's not the case. In other universities, the facilities are not there, but we thankfully have it. And when we have results, and now we have Michael, who is supposed to model things, to upscale it and like get our lab results to a bigger scale and what it means for Africa, for example. So yeah, that's just trying to show you how this diversity in my background actually was very helpful and was probably needed for me to be in this position. We also currently have 2 positions open for another ruminant nutritionist and greenhouse gas emissions specialist, which basically I'm looking for somebody who can do inventory calculations, but at the same time measurements of livestock. I don't know if it's too much to be asked, but it's quite a big skill set. This can also be a postdoc. I was just not allowed to publish it as both, but if anybody is interested in a postdoc and fits the position, can apply. I wanted to do the revision of this earlier this year already, September, but I just have been too busy. And Sonia, my colleague, she also is looking for a postdoc for soil and manure greenhouse gas emissions. So we do have possibilities. We're currently growing. There's lots of work to be done. We have more data than we can process. So yeah, welcome any applications there. Just quickly about what research we do. For direct measurements, we have enteric emission measurements with chambers. We're building up SS6. We do manure, fertilizer, and greenhouse gas emissions and soil emissions using static chambers. We also have automatic chambers. We also do measurements from animal enclosures, which are called, like Africans will know when I say boma, Latin Americans probably not. It's basically where the animals are housed in at night for protection purposes. And then they go out. So it's, you could call it a little bit like a dry lot. And then we also look at landscape emissions, having EC towers. And then we do also indirect greenhouse gas emission estimation. So we have protocols to go to farms to get activity data to estimate enteric and manure emissions. So we have all these activities going on. Besides that, that's why we really have Daniel as lab manager. We do a bunch of lab analysis, have a lot of instruments to do that. Same, we also have a soil and manure lab where we can do many analysis and also building more capacity as time goes. So the responsibility of my positions have increased exponentially, let's say. And also we're going to have I'm the chair for the new GGAA in 225. We're going to be most likely in October in Nairobi in Kenya, and I would love to see you all there. And with that, there's part of our team, unfortunately, not everybody was there during the photographer, but yeah, thank you very much, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Claudia. That was a good one. Thank you so much. There are a heap of questions for you, but I'll try get through the questions. But it was instructive to note that, you know, this path is not always a straight one. And, you know, just following on that, how do you deal with the disappointment? For example, if the path is not straight and you also having to deal with falsified data, delaying your time and all, how do you deal with this disappointment? And especially for women, how do they handle it?
I think the key in anything is not to take it personal. Never take things personal. The data falsification had nothing to do with me. It had to do with how the person was in the from what I've seen. I haven't actually talked with the person, but like it was a situation that the person was in. So for me, it was also important for me how to lead a lab. You need to make sure if somebody can't do their job or has issues that they're not afraid of coming to you. You need to make sure they're not in a situation where they feel like their job is online, or like, because that was a situation there when I think about what was happening. And also, yeah, that's what I try to do when I work with people, that they're comfortable to come if something goes wrong, because we can handle the situation. And there's not being angry with people, like stuff happens, just, okay, this is what happens. Let's deal with it the best way we can, because I know you didn't do it on purpose. Nobody does things on purpose, just sometimes things don't go as planned.
Okay.
And maybe I wasn't worried so much. I'm very optimistic on many things, not always, but I think it's try not to worry.
Yeah, thank you. And one last question. I mean, from your presentation, it was clear that you relied heavily on your networks to probably even get to where you are now. What advice would you give to early career, you know, scientists, people with Cliff grad fellows, about building networks? What is the key things they have to do and look out for?
I think I was fortunate that I got all these connections. And when you go, I think the difference for me when I was going to conferences, even in the US already, because I was sort of going to often by myself to emission conferences because there wasn't much interest on this type of measurements back then. To make sure you make connections with other people, meet new people while you're at a conference. Don't stick with your peers from your university. You see them when you're back. Like, go when somebody you know is talking to somebody, get a connection, get introduced. Go to the professor you're interested in their work, talk with them about their work. Also, what I forgot to say, like when I applied for this position, I did networking too, right? So it's like, okay, this position, who was in this position beforehand? Do you have any sort of connection secondhand to that person? Can I get connected to the position? So actually, I talked to the person who had the position beforehand before I even applied to the position, being like, hey, is this position really like openly advertised? Is it, or is it, because sometimes you have position opening because they must open it because you have to advertise it, but they may have already an internal hire. So that was sort of questions I was asking, right? Because I don't want to waste my time applying for a position where they actually already know who they're going to hire. And also to understand more of the position. Is it really what I want to do? So if you can, and you're interested in the position, and I did the same with the Katia position. I did talk to the Bangor people. I did reach out to them, and I did actually get a talk with the PI of the project beforehand, being asking about the position. So if you're good for the position, don't take it personally sometimes, because like right now, if people would do that with me for the nutritionist position, I'm just so short in time at this point in time. So I wouldn't, that's where you don't take it personal. But like, if you can, try doing this also to see if it's a fit for you, if it's something you want to do.
Yeah, Thank you, Claudia. I know, you know, whoever is online, you can always reach Claudia. She has a email still on the screen. Pick it up. Questions that we couldn't ask because of time, you could ask her, and I'm sure that Claudia would respond to you and answer them. Thank you so much, Claudia, for your presentation. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kofi, and sorry for going so much over time. I didn't realize it was going to take so much time. I'm usually try to be good.
Yes, so we would quickly move on to our last speaker for today, Dr. Dumisani Mthebu. In 2004, Dr. Mthebu joined the government in water resource management and regulation with a specific focus on commercial afforestation, licensing and management. Dr. Mthebu is a former director of the Department of Environmental Affairs, and he has been engaged in environmental issues with a specific focus on technology development and transfer. Please, Dr. Mthebu, we are ready to hear you.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. I'm Dumisani Mthebu from South Africa. I'm currently in New York attending the Science Summit that is happening on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. The idea of the summit is really to say to world leaders while they meet in the UNGA, but how do we then make sure that we mainstream science, technology, and innovation in the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals? Next slide, please. I'm a typical government employee, so I'm not a researcher. So I work for the Department of Science and Innovation. It used to be called Department of Science and Technology. In 2019, we adopted a new white paper, and we felt that we need to put a strong emphasis on innovation, having transformed the science system since 1996 to the present time, but we haven't been able to transition and translate most of the research and development into innovation output. So going forward, there will be a stronger emphasis on innovation as a department. As a department, our job really is to drive research and policy agenda for science, technology, and innovation in the country. And therefore, the department influences policy across government and sectors, be it in energy, water, health, agriculture, and others. And then this is because of the research that we fund as a department. So if you look at our science system in South Africa, by international standards, it is relatively small. There is therefore a need to strengthen it and also to build a capable state to ensure that there is human capital development, to enlarge it and make it more inclusive for everybody in South Africa. So our vision is for increased well-being and prosperity through science, technology, and innovation. This is to ensure that science, technology, and innovation becomes a key driver for economic development, and therefore it must benefit society at large. Next slide, please. So my role really revolves around what I call science diplomacy. Having given that background, my job involves leveraging opportunities and resources for the national system of innovation of South Africa. This is through forging international cooperation and partnerships with various institutions. I work with international organizations within the UN system that are focused on science, technology, and innovation. But I also work with international science-based organizations, even science academies. Some of them are membership-based, to foster that cooperation, collaboration, and forging partnerships. But because we want to build human capital development, So part of the opportunities that we look for example, includes things like human capital development, technical exchanges for our people, technical assistance opportunities that we may receive, fellowships, exchange programs, workshops, conferences, and overall system enhancement, because in terms of making it more productive in terms of our research output and innovation. But we also look for purely financial resources that we need to inject into our system of innovation, because as government, we are not spending nearly enough to support research and development. So we do need to augment our resources from partnerships that we may make from time to time. And then importantly, because I'm in international relations, my work also includes promoting and showcasing our science system and its capabilities. For example, this year we are hosting World Science Summit in South Africa, in Cape Town. And part of the process would be to showcase what is it that we have in South Africa from STI perspective, and but also we're bringing all the eminent scientists across the globe. They'll be converging in South Africa. And by that, we'll be showcasing and promoting our own system while hosting all these scientists in South Africa. So inherent in my job also is negotiations and lobbying. I participate and represent government, for example, in climate change negotiations. So I form part of the delegation from South Africa, and in my role in the delegation is to focus on the what we call technology stream of the negotiations, where we look at how can we, from science, technology, and perspective, technology development and technology transfer, especially from developed to developing countries, so that us as developing countries, we can also meet our obligations of the convention and the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. Before I came to this position, I was involved in regulation, mainly around marine environmental protection, to protect the marine environment from the maritime industry. So as a country, we needed to make sure that as we develop the maritime industry, our marine environment is also protected. But forestry sector regulation as well, in terms of water resource management and licensing, because afforestation consumes a lot of water and needs to be licensed in South Africa. But also environmental sector, integrated environmental authorizations. We have a legislation in South Africa that says that lists some of the activities that may require environmental authorization before they can be undertaken. And my job was to ensure that all those administrative processes of applications are adhered to and applications considered. I've done my master's degree between 2009 and 2012. I studied part-time, and in 2017 to 2020, I did my PhD, but also I did it part-time. This is not a unique phenomenon in South Africa. Most of us tend to study part-time. Next slide, please. So last year, there was a study that was conducted by Professor Morton and others, which was a cross-sectoral PhD tracer study. The study looked at demographic attributes, work experience, career paths, and mobility of doctorate holders, including mobility sectors into and out of the country and into management roles. It also looked at the progress of PhD graduates through the researcher pipeline, from being next generation researcher to being emerging researchers and to being established researchers. Next slide, please. So this study found that if one looks at employment status of graduates during doctoral studies, it found that the majority of doctoral students, they study part-time. This is my same experience as well. I studied part-time, about 61% study part-time. This is simply because when students study, they are already employed. So it becomes very difficult for them to relinquish their employment while they're studying. So they would rather study part-time. So I was also employed when I studied. Then we have about 40% of students that study full-time. But you also find that there seems to be, this pattern seems to differ in terms of by scientific domain. For example, those with students in STEM more likely to study full-time than students in social sciences. So yes, we have those that are studying part-time. There seems to be a tendency for those that are doing technical subjects that will go full-time. Next slide, please. With regards to financing of the doctoral studies, there were three sources of funding. The first one, which was about 33%, most of the doctoral studies were self-financed because obviously they were already employed and then they used their salary to pay for their studies. The second most cited source of funds came from the universities where they were studying from. And then the third part was through the National Funding Agency. We have what we call the National Research Foundation in South Africa that supports postgraduate studies. So this was the third most cited source of funding. Next slide, please. With regard to finding employment after graduating, the majority of graduates seems to remain with the same employer even after they have obtained their PhDs. I'm still employed where I was working before I obtained my PhD. So this correlates with the fact that they're already employed when they enrolled for PhD. And then you have about 20% that tend to take postdoctoral fellowships after completion. And then about 2% struggle to get employment after completing their doctoral degrees. Next slide, please. With regard to geographical mobility of South African doctoral graduates, in South Africa, we are likely to have benefited significantly from the inward inflow of doctoral students. Of the 3,770 graduates in the sample who were born in South Africa, only about 9.2% seem to have left the country after graduation, while about 35% remained in the country. So there's very there's a small number of graduates that are leaving the country after graduating in South Africa. But next slide, please. And then if one looks at other findings, intersectoral mobility, nearly 2/3 of respondents were employed in the higher education sector at the time of the survey and have remained in this sector. There is also a small percentage that has moved to government. Most of the research in South Africa in government is done through the science councils. So, and then some of them have moved to business, because in government we just do typical government work, but the research work would be done, for example, Water Research Commission, Agricultural Research Council, or Medical Research Council. That is where more research gets done, that is funded by government other than outside of academia. Then postdoctoral fellowship career trajectory. a fifth of the survey respondents accepted a postdoctoral fellowship upon completion of their studies. And then if you look at the gender, there is slightly more than half of the postdocs who are males. And on average, postdocs obtain their PhD at a much younger age. Somebody was saying that, I think it was the moderator, that unlike in Africa, in other developed countries, postgrads and PhDs, they are young. Whereas for us in Africa, we tend to get our PhDs at a very advanced age. And then the majority of postdocs spent an average of 3 years in a fellowship position, even though there are some that have tended to take more than one postdoc. We had a presenter who was saying that at some point he said, it's enough, I won't take any more or do any more postdoc work. But I think this was because they didn't have any other employment that they would take so they chose to stay with a postdoc position. Next slide, please. Now, in 2021, the OECD did a small study on the precarity of academic research careers, and it came up with a few recommendations. One of them talks to improving the working conditions and offering more transparent, predictable, and flexible career prospects for postdoctoral researchers. And the second one talks to offering broad professional development during postdoctoral training. And it also talks to promoting the intersectoral mobility of researchers. It also talks about improving institutional practices regarding human resource management in research and promoting equal opportunities, diversity, and inclusion in research careers by identifying existing biases and challenges. It also talks about establishing better links between research assessment and funding and human resource management policy objectives. And of course, encourages the support of the international mobility of researchers. So these are some of the recommendations that the OECD came up with to deal with, to try and reduce the precarity of academic research careers. I think this was my last slide. You can just move to the next, and then the last one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mthebu. There are some questions that have come, and I want to put them across. But I mean, listening to you, you are somebody that have gone through the full circle: academia, industry, and now policy. How do early career research navigate this path? From academia, you've worked in industry, and now you're in policy. How? What did you do? What was the trick? What were the key things that we have to look out for in that space?
Well, in academia, really, it was more about studying. So I think for me, it's one thing to, as researchers and academics, whatever we call it, it's one thing to publish papers and to do conferences, but I think it becomes very important also to be able to sell yourself. Yeah. If you can sell and publish your paper and be accepted, what makes it difficult for one to be able to say, yes, I've done X, Y, and Z, and I'm capable, these are my skills, and be able to sell yourself. So maybe sometimes we tend to sell ourselves short in that area. But I also think that obviously experience helps. a lot, because it brings a combination of your academic expertise, but also your professional experience, which makes it even more attractive for one to be identified and even to be spotted by prospective employers.
Yeah, thank you. I think that theme has been running through all our presentation, being deliberate about your networks, making yourself visible, making people know what you can do. Then when the opportunities come, you can be referred to. Another question that came up was, in that field, how is it favorable for women? How do women cope in that field? What do they have to develop special skills to be able to succeed at that level of science diplomacy, for instance?
Well, issues of equity and gender parity are very important. I think whether in government, whether in the private sector, we need to be deliberate about them, because, for example, in South Africa, we have specific programs that are aimed at targeting women. For example, women in science programs, where we fund support them in scholarships to ensure that they develop their skills, and then they are able to compete in equal footing with male. So I think it helps to be deliberate, obviously without compromising quality, but there's a big pool of women who are capable, who can take up these positions, and without those deliberate effort, because we know that there are still careers that are seen to be male dominated, and unless we are deliberate about them, the status quo might remain the same.
Yeah, thank you. The conversation is getting interesting, but unfortunately we are out of time, but we are not out of touch. The emails are there. Whatever questions that you have and we couldn't ask, please just drop them in. We'll forward it to the relevant speakers for them to answer and get back to you. I think it has been an interesting session today, and there has been a lot of takeaways. And for me, one thing that has been critical is building your strong networks, being deliberate about your visibility, and taking advantage of those networks. I think one thing Claudia also said that really got me thinking was, it's good to learn a second language. It helps always. It is a key thing. So I would want to say a big thank you to all our speakers for sharing their experiences and knowledge with us today. And thank you also to the participants for attending the workshop. It was so good to see people I haven't seen in a long while. And we hope this has given you ideas on your career pathways, and that is available to PhD graduates here. And if there is something from today's session that you would like to discuss further, just as I said, or access further information, please, you can contact our dedicated GRADS secretariat. They are doing so much work behind the scenes. It's amazing the kind of collaborations and coordination they do. It's just amazing. So please, you can put your in your contacts in the chat box, and then they will get back to you on this. So thank you so much to everybody for participating in today's session. And hopefully next time we meet and have another fruitful discussion. Thank you very much from me. Thank you.